So hello and welcome along to Dads in Business. My name is Rob Taylor from Dads in Business, and this is our podcast and video series where we aim to create conversations and spaces with other dads, other business owners, professional coaches and experts in their field and space to help busy working dads bring the best of themselves to work and to home. And I'm delighted today to be joined by recently published author, ex-Army Commando, successful businessman, and most importantly for this context, dad of two, Dan Stanley. Dan, good morning to you. Give us a bit of an intro about who you are, what you do, where you come from, and a bit of your background. It'd be great to get to know more about you.
Hi, Rob. Good morning. So, yeah, I'm Dan Stanley. I'm a coach. I work exclusively with men in high-pressure roles. Usually they're business owners or corporate leaders. And over the past 4 years, under the banner of BetterMen, which is my business, I've been helping men to create work-life balance instead of work-life conflict. I've helped them save marriages, to exit businesses for 6, 7, and recently 8-figure sums. And I've even helped the client get investment in the BBC's Dragon's Den. So yeah, my kind of life before BetterMen was superficially successful, and you could argue that it's potentially a premature midlife crisis at the age of 34. Kind of made me question my life's direction and trajectory, realizing that I ticked a lot of life's boxes in living in a nice house and driving a nice car and spending money on holidays, and actually my success felt somewhat superficial. And perhaps because maybe some of the things we'll talk about today, I didn't feel as though I had the vocabulary to explain kind of how I was feeling, and I kind of created a self-imposed echo chamber of isolation where I didn't communicate to my loved ones or my friends how I was thinking and feeling, and eventually I got myself into a bit of a state where I needed to press pause on my life and take some time out.
Wow, and what age were you when that happened, Dan? When you realised
34.
that? 34.
Yeah.
Wow. So I mean, I'm 38 now, so I can sort of connect back when I first started working for myself. I must have been 29, and I became a dad at 29. And it's just head down, get onto it. You need to be that breadwinner. Yeah, I sort of assumed that role myself, but that's what we fall into, isn't it? And I think there was a lot of pressure around that. You know, I found becoming a dad challenging. I was one of the first out of my social circle to do it. Yeah. My dad, he passed away years before, so I didn't have any point of reference in that respect. You're almost just cut loose, so you have to defer to something, don't you? And I guess we defer to what you reference in your book, Rethinking Masculinity, as learned habits, for want of a better word. Is that how you put it? Where's this frame of man come from, and why is it not working currently? Do you think where's it gone wrong?
Yeah, great question, Rob. And I could probably talk about this all day, but I'll try to keep my answers concise.
You've got 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that in many cases, men learn through, as you rightly said, a point of reference or modeling of other men. And typically men of previous generations, they created a blueprint or a construct of masculinity that actually doesn't serve us in today's society. You know, if we look back at the recent history of masculinity, you know, the men came back from World War I and World War II. And in many respects, before PTSD was recognized, it was called shell shock. And these were damaged dads. And they came back from the wars and kind of, because of whether they'd experienced in the trenches perhaps and in combat, they kind of just wanted a very simple, perhaps frugal life. And that worked for men of that era. Then they gave birth to the baby boomers, arguably our dads, mums and dads and our parents' age. And that generation was much more aspirational. They didn't want just to live in a small house and have a job for life. They wanted a career. And that kind of coincided with the rise of marketing and kind of consumerism. So those people then went on to kind of create this culture of keeping up with the Joneses and kind of proving their worth through their work. And the construct that was created around modern day masculinity is that you have to, in my opinion, is that you have to be strong. You know, boys don't cry, man up, that kind of terminology, that you are expected to be silent. You know, it's a little bit like the first rule of Fight Club, you know, don't talk about what it's like to be a man. And then the third part of this for me is about the success piece. And I think that's where a lot of modern day men kind of trip themselves up, in that they believe that they have to provide for their families. And that provision is through financial means, when I'm sure that as we kind of develop our conversation today, we'll realize that actually providing for our family is more than just providing a home and some financial security. There's a lot more to that that's not necessarily being met in today's society. So yeah, I think that the blueprint that was handed down by men of previous generations, despite the positive intent behind it, just doesn't fit into the modern day society in which we live.
Yeah, I mean, that's very clear, and it's a good sort of framing of to how we've ended up here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to sort of ask and probe a bit about why you think it's changing. Why does it need to change? Everything's worked fine up until now, so why do you think it needs to change, Dan?
Yeah. I suppose my kind of initial question is like, has it all been fine, and has it worked well up until now? You know, I think men of a previous generation, because again, the kind of, you know, their inability to express their emotions because they just weren't taught a role model by their fathers or by their parental figures, it is that, you know, kind of a lot of men would just kind of start a career or start a business, and they would put on those golden handcuffs and they'd work themselves, you know, they'd work themselves to the bone, perhaps, to provide for their families. And what they'd essentially do is just pass the time then until retirement, and then they would then do all the things that they'd wanted to do. And I think today, in our kind of digitally connected society with social media and, you know, the flippant phrase that the comparison is the thief of joy, you know, we're not just keeping up the Joneses anymore. We're looking on Instagram and LinkedIn and perhaps Facebook and seeing all of these other people all around the world kind of having things that we would like. And then in a way that means that we're not able to appreciate what we have. And there's a phrase that I coined. I call it the myth of masculinity. And it's the belief that professional success equals personal happiness. And I think because a lot of men kind of believe that flawed thinking, is that they prioritize their careers and their professional success over their health, their friendships, their families, their well-being. An actual fact, and it creates kind of, you know, Tony Robbins calls it the ultimate failure, success without fulfillment. And a lot of men kind of in the middle stages of their lives find themselves in a space where they've ticked a lot of life's boxes, but they don't feel the way they expected, proud, fulfilled, as if, you know, they're grateful for what they have. And I think a lot of it comes down to the top 5 challenges of modern day masculinity.
No, absolutely. And I think, yeah, reading through your book, I think those 5, I can connect with probably 3 of them. I'm not quite at the midlife part yet, and we'll dive into those 5. But I really like the strong, silent, successful framing, if you like, that has created our context for where we are today. And I work with a lot of smaller business owners, especially from the trades industry, but also with a lot of corporate B2B CEOs, MDs, where it might be family legacy or what we've always done got us to this point, so carry on doing it while we change. And, you know, the very first measure of success for a small business owner, the simple first question you ask when you walk into a networking event or a trade counter or some sort of conference, are you busy? The success we measure against being busy means that we have to go out and chase that. And I fell into that trap as well. I think when I first started working for myself, it was through redundancy, and then I decided that I've had enough, I've been made redundant. It was my second time. I had a 2-year-old and a pregnant wife, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and make a fist of this myself. But I fell into some of the traps there. I need to get busy. Why do you need to get busy? To prove I've made the right decision. It didn't equate success, but we are also pulled by the fact through a time when we're living through rising costs and pressures on the finances of the house. Someone has to pick that up because we do have a baseline. So, I mean, I know you're not suggesting that we just forget that we have to earn an income, but how do we break that habit from the first of your 5 points that, what are these symptoms you'd suggest, is workaholism? I love my work. I love my business. I've built something that I enjoy doing. Why shouldn't I work more?
So I really believe that time is a finite resource, and that it's our most valuable commodity. And if we're, I suppose, investing would be the wrong word. If we're spending or wasting all of our time in work and not investing in it in the things that matter most to us, then you could argue that you're earning a living without the living. And that in a large part of this is, you know, is fundamentally what the BetterMen blueprint is about. You know, I kind of look at the kind of what we were taught and have this kind of belief that a lot of what we were taught, like the foundation of our life is professional success. And then on top of that, if we imagine like a pyramid, so professional success is our foundation. We have to make sure that that is in order first. Then on top of it, because of the way that we're targeted now through clever marketing and social media, and this kind of comparison to other men, perhaps other successful men, we think that we need to have like wealth and assets on top of that. Then on top of that, we prioritize our time of our family and kind of, making memories, which is great. But again, it dilutes us from sometimes the things that are most important to us. And the thing furthest away from the base of our pyramid, the thing that should be foundational to us, is ourselves. So I genuinely believe there's a lot of men out there today that are kind of don't really recognize it, because you could argue that it's the respectable addiction, but actually the workaholics. They're trying to prove their worth through their work. It's in many respects, it's kind of, if you're working kind of 40, 50, 60 hours a week in a physical sense, you don't really take into consideration then also the mental and the emotional hours that you're investing into work. And if all that time is going into that area, undoubtedly there's going to be consequences, or there's going to be collateral damage in terms of your relationships, which we'll come on to next. But loneliness for me is a big issue as well. So we've got workaholism, and burnout was the first challenge. The next one is loneliness. And I had a moment probably about this time last year. I was running in the morning in the woods near where I live, and the podcast I was listening to, the host raised this question that maybe your listeners would appreciate. He said, in your hour of need, who would you turn to? Or in your hour of need, who would you call? And I kind of realized in that moment that a lot of my closest friendships, the men that have been my best men at my wedding, I actually wouldn't call them, because we were kind of on different trajectories, and what I realized in that moment, actually, loneliness, I was a little bit lonely in my life. And I think that there was a survey done. It was by a mental health charity, a blind survey, and they found that 1 in 3 men don't have a best friend. And you got to look at why is that the case? It comes back to, again, what we were taught about being silent and shut down and not having that emotional connection and intimacy with the people that we appreciate most. And then because we're working too much and we're burning ourselves out, perhaps a little bit lonely in our lives, we don't have a safe space to decompress what we're experiencing. And then that can create poor mental health. And, I think everybody has mental health. It's on a spectrum between perhaps poor and good. And what usually dictates whether you have good or poor mental health is usually your relationship with yourself. But again, it's something we're not taught. We never consider the value of our relationship with ourselves. We're always looking for external answers and external solutions and external validation. And we never really give any credence to how important it is to feel good about who we are and how we're living. On top of that, then, if we have kind of been living life this way for a period of time, we arrive at midlife crisis. And, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it? But the reality is that often men will they'll feel as though their life isn't been led in the way that they want, but they will probably do one of 3 things. They will either numb themselves through either work or alcohol or social media scrolling or porn, perhaps, whatever it might be. They'll numb themselves from feeling the discomfort that their own lives are creating. They will nice it out. They will just put on a fake smile and pretend that everything's okay, hoping that the storm will pass, but inevitably it doesn't, and it won't. Or they'll act it out. They'll start playing up in their lives. They'll do things that are maybe self-destructive or are going to cause, greater complications. And ultimately, if you're a workaholic, you're a little bit lonely in your life, you're struggling with poor mental health, you're kind of maybe in a midlife crisis phase of your time here, and you don't communicate that with your partner, your loved one, there's a high probability that because you're not sharing how you're feeling, that you could end up divorced. And when I was kind of starting to put the premise together for my book, I was really conscious, thinking, bloody hell, Dan, this feels a little bit like gaslighting. Like, is what you're saying true? And so I did more research. I kind of looked back across a lot of my client conversations and the people that had reached out to me and inquired to work with me as coaches and coachees. And I kind of came to the conclusion, actually, that where we are in modern day masculinity is really at a crossroads. And the choices we have is to carry on pretending that everything's okay when clearly it isn't, because of burnout, workaholism, male suicide, divorce rates increasing. Or do we choose to rethink masculinity, the title of my book, and actually look at a broader definition of masculinity other than just being silent, strong, and successful?
Mm. Wow, and thank you for going through through the 5 points. And there is almost like a bit of a downward spiral. I guess divorce is the manifestation of things that have gone wrong before. I
Yeah.
assume. I can resonate probably with workaholism. You know, in the early days working for yourself, you have to prove that point. You have to go.
Yeah.
You have to go. We talk to a lot of people in corporates where it's almost a competition about who can do more. You know, these
Yeah.
global companies where their
Yeah.
managers are putting meetings in their diaries at 7 a.m. so they can't see the kids. And it leads to anxiety and overwhelm and guilt because they're pulled left, right, and center.
Yeah.
But then there's also this expectation we've found in our research that hybrid working or remote working pretty much means that you're on call 24/7. So there's no boundaries created.
Yeah.
The workaholism, even if you don't want to do it, is almost put on you. There's a thing by your employer, by your business, by the cross time zones that we speak on. There is no 9 to 5 anymore. It's 9 o'clock somewhere, whenever. And the loneliness piece, I can connect with. You know, I'm glad you referenced the research, because our research suggests as well that 1 in 3 have no close friends, and I can probably connect a bit with that. Like I said, I was probably the first out of our social circle to have a child. A couple of my best mates moved to different countries, so you don't see them. And we end up having friendships through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Because we're in WhatsApp groups. And we're always chatting on them.
Yeah.
But it's that physical side of things that is missing. You know, it was my birthday recently. I was thinking, well, who could I go out with for a pint? And I couldn't really think of anyone. Because the couple of people I do are in other countries. Others are, they're away doing a festival. And my other friends are through my collaborative thing at work. So I built businesses with them.
Yeah.
There is no friend, if you like, that's in that space. Is that something that you see as well? As men become dads, they don't have that frame, that network.
100%. I call it the messy middle. And it's that stage of life where our parental responsibilities and our professional responsibilities are squeezing us from both sides. And ultimately, because there's only so much time in the day, we kind of find ourselves stuck between a rock and a hard place, having to meet our career or our business expectations, but also then having to reconcile that with the guilt that sometimes we have about maybe not being at home with our families, or even when we are at home, not being in the room with our loved ones. Yeah. So that kind of dad guilt is rife. I also think that, that messy middle phase, it really can be corrosive to one's sense of self. And if we're not doing things that we enjoy, if we're not spending time with people that we want to be with, ultimately we'll find that we dilute who we are. And yeah, it completely resonates. There's a really great quote. I love a quote because I think they give context to perhaps things that we're thinking and feeling. And the quote is this. It was referenced to Einstein, and I have no reason to believe that it wasn't him. It's in my book, and it's adversity introduces a man to himself. Adversity introduces a man to himself. And, when I had my midlife crisis, which actually, because I chose to do some work on myself, some introspection, and kind of invest in my own self through coaching, I kind of realized that in that adversity, it creates an option, an opportunity. And what I did through my adversity, I realized a lot of the WhatsApp groups that I was a part of, the connection was there, but it was digital and it was kind of superficial. A lot of it was around arguably locker room sort of boy banter. And I didn't really want any more of that in my life. I kind of realized that it wasn't working for me. So I stepped out of lots of WhatsApp groups and by default, and kind of, I didn't recognize this was going to happen in advance. By default, people just stopped, my phone stopped buzzing. People stopped asking me out. The Six Nations would be on because I'm a rugby union fan, and all of a sudden there wouldn't be any hospitality tickets, or there wouldn't be an opportunity to go to the pub and have a pint with the boys and watch the rugby. And I felt lonely in my own life. Surrounded by thousands of people through social media, but lonely. I decided to do something about it. So I set up a men's walking group. We're called Men and Mountains. And from very humble beginnings, I just asked a few guys that I felt that our values were aligned. I asked them if they wanted to come out for a walk on a Sunday morning in South Wales, and it was wet and it was windy, and we talked and we laughed, and a pint at the end in the pub had never tasted so good. And I thought to myself, there's something in this. So, back 3 years ago when we first started, there's about 350 members now, all across the UK. From what looks like a fairly narrow demographic, but men, middle-aged, professional careers or running their own businesses that recognize that they're time poor. And if they don't make a stand and take some time back for themselves, whilst it might not be, a complete resolution, it's an opportunity to share a challenge, to share a conversation. And guys come from the Northwest, the Northeast, the South, and they'll come to Brecon once a month usually to go for a walk and a talk. And Men and Mountains, that's where the concept was born. And when we first started 3 years ago, the rules were this. You had to have a Gore-Tex jacket, a set of boots, and if you enjoyed your day out on the hill, you had to bring somebody else to the next walk, but they couldn't be a dickhead. And it was that simple. Boots, jacket, boots, and no dickheads. And kind of organically, it's kind of grown and grown and grown. And this year we've walked every month. We've been and done a Yorkshire Three Peaks. We've been out to the Alps for 4 or 5 days as well, walking in the Alps. And so even if anyone's listening to this now, recognizing that actually I feel a little bit lonely in my own life, that's it's a transient state. You don't need to stay there. You don't need to be there. But what you do need to do, and what I would encourage, is for those people that feel lonely to look for groups that they feel that they will be aligned with in the future. People are going in the same direction, are on the same page. And whether that's Men and Mountains or it's something else, just reach out, connect, have a conversation. Because although a lot of men might not put their hand up and say they're lonely, it's undoubtedly happening throughout society, and you're not alone despite the way that you feel.
Well, you can almost sleepwalk into loneliness, I think, can't you? Because you just carry on doing what you're doing, and then before you know it, where's everyone gone?
Yeah.
And you look back, you think, well, where are they all? I had a load of friends before, and you're right. I mean, fair play for creating the Men and Mountains project. My background working in events means that I have just a thing for saying, well, if it doesn't exist, I'll create a space.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you've done there. You say it sounds like a very specific group of people, but I tell you what, if it was a general well-being walk, men probably wouldn't go on it. But because you've defined it and created a space just for those people, they connect with it.
Yeah.
And this is why I love chats like this so much. Yes, it's digital, but we're face to face in a digital sense. Chatting to people who are just like me and have common concerns and issues. I always leave these calls feeling great because the space exists.
Yeah.
It's a very frank and open discussion. I think it's important to align with or find a space and a community because they are out there. And if they're not out there, make your own.
Yeah.
Create your own, I guess. I just wanted to touch on the midlife crisis one before we dive on to sort of challenges around men and dads for a modern age. I'm 38 now. I guess broadly speaking, when should we be looking out for a midlife crisis? But I guess more from a personal perspective. I said my dad passed away many years ago. I was 20 years old when he went, and he was 56, I think he was, 54, 56. That's become my frame.
Yeah.
I think I've got 18 years left.
Yeah, wow.
Now, and that challenges me. That makes me want to work hard. It makes me want to be financially secure. Make me want to do everything for the kids. So it burdens me, and that's my challenge that I need to try and figure out how to overcome. You might be able to help me with that. But when, in theory, is midlife, and what are the signs that it's starting? What's the signs we should look out for?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's I'm really sorry to hear that your dad passed at an early age. If we look, generally speaking, as a gender, the average life expectancy of a UK male is 79. So, if we were kind of looking at this in a very binary sense, we're kind of saying at middle age is probably exactly where you're at now, Rob. Yeah. But I think that because nowadays, especially through the way that digital media and the internet has created opportunities for people to not have maybe a job for life, but have to have careers, to reach more people, to grow businesses quicker, to give people voices so that they can be heard and found more easily. I think what we're finding now is a lot of people are achieving success at a younger age. And by success, I mean in a societal sense, in that they have a successful career or business, or they have the items that one would constitute as the symbols of success. But for me, a midlife crisis, generally it doesn't happen overnight. There's going to be some thoughts and some feelings that we will try to either numb or nice out or act out, and we'll try not to kind of reconcile in our own minds and own thoughts. But usually it's a sense of dissatisfaction that an experience that you can't give words to, because we don't have the vocabulary to, or we don't give ourselves permission to explain that actually, despite having all of these things in my life, maybe I'm not as fulfilled or as happy or as connected or, as healthy or as loved as I thought I would be, having kind of won in the game of life. And it really fits in with that messy middle piece. When our time has constantly been squozed through work and parental responsibilities, through our relationships, kind of being surrounded by all the things that we were told that would make us feel a certain way, but not having any of those feelings, that should start to raise some awareness. And I talk about 4 pillars of progression in my book. And the first is awareness. If we don't have an awareness of where we are, then we will, like you said, kind of live this kind of like autopilot sort of default lifestyle, just going through the motions, kind of working, scrolling, eating, sleeping, and just repeating all of that on a constant basis. So we need some level of awareness about how we're, not just how we're thinking, because often what we can do is just kind of ruminate or maybe rationalize what we're experiencing. Instead, what we need to do is to connect to how we're feeling. What's my intuition telling me? What feelings am I feeling about the way that I'm living? And a great way to do this is a temperature check. It's just whether people do this now because they're listening or watching to this recording. It's just to choose 3 words that would describe how you're feeling about your current life. 3 words. Usually that'll give you a real good temperature check or barometer of exactly where you're at. And if the words you're using are kind of like stressed, busy, and tired, it's no doubt that maybe you're not enjoying the life that you created. After awareness comes acceptance. No one's coming to save you in your own life. When you're a mature male, there's an expectation that you should be able to solve your own shit. So the reality is that the only way you can solve anything that you're experiencing that you no longer want to is through self-leadership. And the way that I define self-leadership, Rob, to put it into context, is that you are intentionally influencing your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions in alignment with the things that you want to achieve in your life. So that you're intentionally influencing your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions so that you can achieve the things that you want in your life. And I say that twice because it's bloody important. Nowadays, a lot of people don't consider how they're leading themselves or what they are an example of. So with awareness comes acceptance, and after acceptance comes action. There's got to be a point where if you're not happy in your own life, if you feel it though, maybe you're on the cusp or you could be heading or spiraling into a midlife crisis, you've got to do something different. And you kind of said it earlier, like what got you here won't get you there. So working all of those hours, pursuing societal success instead of your own definition is kind of going to mean that you arrive at a place in your life perhaps where you really don't want to be. And the 4th pillar of progression, the one that kind of not closes this loop, but just completes the first cycle, is accountability. Often the easiest person to fool is the man that we see in the mirror each morning. So, if our word isn't strong enough to encourage us to perhaps do things differently, to take a different trajectory or to tweak our own trajectory, then we need to find some external accountability. And maybe that's where people like you and I in the services that we offer come in. But the pillars of progression, they move you from where you are to where you want to be.
I like that. And one of those that stuck out for me there, I think it was Jim Rohn who once said, take 100% responsibility for your life. And that was one of those, I guess, light bulb moments in my early time working for myself, trying to figure out how to balance work and when home. It's like, well, no one's going to do it for me.
Yeah,
I need to be responsible for it. And then it was in his book, the 7 Habits book by Stephen Covey, that says it's your ability to respond. It's the choice that you make. That is your responsibility. With a little play on words, and it's always stuck with me. It's how do I choose to respond in that situation? Then what am I going to do about it? Which references your action point. Because sometimes you see a lot of gurus. I hate the word gurus, by the way, but you see a lot of gurus, don't you, online, just saying, just think about it and it will come. Just think about it and it will happen. And
jump in a net will appear.
See, I mean, I like the sentiment of it, but if I want a Lamborghini, it ain't gonna just be outside. You've got to do something about it, and it's a part that's missing because that's the grunt work, isn't it? You've got to do it. It's not just niceties and headlines. I think an accountability there as well is key. My business projects are all collaborations because I genuinely think that you're greater than the sum of the parts. accountability in my personal life is probably something I could develop. Professionally, I've got it nailed.
Yeah.
Personally, I guess that's my wife in a respect, but I don't want my wife to be my accountability partner.
Yeah.
Do you have one? Do you have an accountability partner?
Yeah, I'm an advocate of external accountability. I find that despite obviously coming from a fairly disciplined background, being in the military, that I found that when I outsource some of the things that are particularly important to me, then not only do I achieve them quicker, but I probably achieve them to a higher standard. So to put that into context, yeah, for me, I tried counseling when I was kind of in my midlife crisis, and that didn't work for me. I felt like it was too slow and too passive. So I tried counseling, that didn't work. And then I kind of came across a coach, and that really allowed me to move forward faster. So I've had a coach in my life for my personal kind of progression. I've had a marriage coach as well. When I went through my midlife crisis, the collateral impact of that meant that it caused a lot of conflict in my marriage. So that needed to be resolved. The other year, I decided that I was going to run an ultra marathon. There's 107 miles across the Brecon Beacons. And the first thing I did was found a running coach, because I knew that I needed somebody who'd walked that path literally to guide me forward. And when I started writing my book at the end of last year, the first thing I did was Google how to write a book, and the second thing I did was to get a book coach. So yeah, that having that external accountability, I think for me is really important. And I never met my dad, or I have no memories of him. He just wasn't in my life when I was growing up. So I don't really have a reference point either. But what I do have now is a mentor, a guy called Russell. Every 2 weeks, we sit down in a Zoom room like we are now, and we have a very wide and diverse, but also very deep conversations about what's going on in my life, and kind of what's working and what I need to take ownership of.
Thanks for sharing that. It's good that you're so open about your experiences. And yeah, so I guess if we go it alone, it becomes challenging. And I just want to move on to a bit around the challenges that men and dads are facing in 2022 towards 2023. It seems like there's one thing after another, whether it's the pandemic, expectations, it's inflation, it's cost of living, it's wars, it's whatever it is. It's almost like everything's a catastrophe, or there's existential threats to everything we do. And like you mentioned before, there's a lot of external influence from social media. My kids watch YouTubers who are 22 years old, who are worth millions of dollars, who give thousands of dollars away. That becomes almost their expectation. It's like, where's mine? It's like, and so that plays a part and sits on me. And I tend to call these things the little should gremlins. It's Rob should be doing this. He should be home earlier. He should be working harder. He should earn more money. He should be on the school run. He should be picking the kids up. He should get a proper job. All these things, the kids shouldn't watch YouTube. The kids should watch YouTube. They all pull in different angles.
Yeah.
How do we start creating boundaries for ourselves around what works for us and our family units? Where does that play out? Because there are so many external influences, aren't there? Where do we begin with that?
Yeah. Self-leadership, being really present and conscious about what you're exposing yourself to. Because when we step back from social media and the constant bombardment of catastrophizing situations, these things are happening factually. They are happening all around the world. But if we're exposing ourselves to the kind of mainstream media, and the kind of the messages that we keep being bombarded with, the chances are that we're going to put ourselves into a state of anxiousness, fight or flight. And we're going to think then that actually we're kind of looking for those external answers, thinking that everything that we need is outside of ourselves. But I really believe, from not just my own journey, from the last kind of 4 years of working with one-to-one clients and being trusted by good men to help them live better lives, that what we don't actually need that much is outside of ourselves. We need to feel good about ourselves. We need to feel happy. We need to feel healthy. We need to feel connected. We need to feel loved and appreciated and respected. And all of those things can happen really quickly. And without being callous, Rob, if we look back to the pandemic, especially to lockdown 1, look at all those dads that were out there, walking with their children, taking the dogs out, feeding the ducks, going on bike rides, heading to the beach. When the world stopped and that massive pause button was pressed, look at the space that people had and how much people enjoyed their lives. There's a lot of talk now about the great resignation and quiet quitting. There's a reason, because almost the pandemic was that forced reset that allowed people to take stock of where they were. So yeah, to come back to your question, I think that what we need to be really mindful of is what we're an example of. Because if our children kind of are looking at us and we're always busy, we're always looking down into our screens, we're always kind of, prioritizing the things that are urgent over the things that are important, then, all we're going to do then is to pass on the kind of same baggage that we inherited from men of the previous generations, regardless of their intent. We're going to pass that on to our children. So I think that, importantly, we need to recognize what we're an example of. And, for me now, I recognize that I'm in a period of what feels so. Yeah, in answer to your question, I think we need to take a look at ourselves and maybe ask what could be an uncomfortable question, and the question would be, what are we currently an example of? I think that is a good stepping off point. And, when I talk about self-leadership, sometimes we like life to be really binary, and sometimes we like it to be really kind of abstract. But if we're going to be really binary about this, if you're below the line of self-leadership, you're kind of, I suppose, expecting external resources or attainments or validation to kind of make you feel a certain way about your life. Where if you're above the line of self-leadership and you're leading yourself well, you recognize that you're responsible for what you experience and what you do and don't achieve in your life. And I think that collectively, there's a need for us now as men, as people that are going to role model to future generations of boys and girls, tomorrow's men and women. Like, what do we want to be an example of?
And you referenced there, we just had a little camera glitch, but I think it was still on record, where you were talking about lockdown 1 and how dads were forced almost to engage better with their kids. And I look back at that as, well, for a start, it's a time that was so different and will never happen again in our lifetimes, I don't think, that it was something new and it was exciting and the weather was great. And I was fortunate enough to have a garden. I know there were people who didn't, so probably experienced it differently. For me, it was the best summer I've had. Because you couldn't go out to work so much. There was an hour of work on Zoom. There was an hour of PE with Joe. There was then the garden time with the kids. But it seems like it was almost a race then to get back to your 80 hours a week for some. And it's like, did you not learn anything during that time? Look, you've enjoyed it, you've engaged, you've got on with it. And I think your question that you posed to us all to say, what example are you setting? These are the bane of my life sometimes, our smartphones and our devices, because I'm sure you've been the same. I'm guilty of it, where I get home from work and the first thing I do is either open my laptop to see if anyone's emailed me after I've refreshed my phone on the bus on the way home to see if anyone's emailed me. And the amount of times I say, I'll be there in a sec, just need to check this. And then you see them mirroring that behavior and you have a go at them for doing it. Like, you're ignoring me, you're distracted. What are you doing? And I could kick myself sometimes. It's a real behavior that I'm trying to improve on, because I don't like it. It's horrible. It's not engaged. And I think just as we move into what example we are setting on our kids, there's a lot happening in their lives too. My kids are 8, 6, and 4. I think, are yours similar age there, Dan, as well?
6 in December and 3.5.
So we've got very similar age kids, and I think there's so much going on in their lives. When you think 2 years of it has been this pandemic, then they're back in school. Everything's on demand, everything's immediate, everything's now. They're the first generation that is socially native. I was, I guess, digitally native before that. It's changed, and you can see that they behave differently. And my wife's mom and dad, they say, "Oh, it weren't like this in my day." It's like, well, it's just how it is now. So there's a challenge, I think, for dads in setting our kids up to succeed in a world that we don't recognize. How do we go about that? Because there are so many pressures. There's the gender questions coming around. There's the work pressures. There's this. There's so much. How do we set our kids up to succeed in that respect?
It's Socrates over 2,000 years ago said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life. Beware the barrenness of a busy life." And just because we're not in work, if we're still choosing to scroll through our emails and look at our social media feeds, we're despite the discomfort of the answer, we're still in work. And, I don't have any notification. I have 2 notifications on my phone. One is for my car, for the car app, because I had a car that was stolen a few years back, and I am, I suppose, conscious of that. And the other is for my house alarm. I don't have any other notifications on my phone. And yeah, I recognize that, a previous version of me felt dependent on my phone because I wanted to be constantly contactable for my clients and have interactions with people in digital media because I thought it was useful for my business. But now, when I go downstairs, I work from my attic office at home. When I go downstairs, I leave the phone at the top of the stairs and go down and spend time with my wife and my children, and just have that disconnect from digital media. But yeah, I think what's important here is that, people are always looking, to gurus and to influencers, looking for the clues towards success. But also, I think failure leaves clues. And I think what's important here is if you're looking at men that you're maybe aspiring to be like because they have kind of succeeded in their careers or businesses, look a little bit deeper or a little bit more laterally. Look at what they've got going on in their life. Are they divorced? Are they happily married? Do they look healthy? Do they have strong friendships? And really look who it is that you're looking to role model and emulate. Because I'm sure you're familiar with the top 5 regrets of the dying. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Rob. It's a great piece of work by an Australian palliative care nurse called Bonnie Ware. And I think when we question our mortality, I think it really puts life into context, because we start to recognize actually that we're not here for an indefinite period of time. And those top 5 regrets of dying, a couple of them that stand out really strongly to me. That the first, there's 5 of them, which for maybe the listeners or viewers that aren't familiar with it, the palliative care nurse in Australia, she interviewed close to 1,000 people that were on their deathbed. And what she identified in that stage of their lives, where there was no need to kind of have an egoic answers or responses, was that actually almost all of these people, they wish that they hadn't worked so hard. They wished that they gave themselves to be happier. They wish that they'd had the courage to live a life true to themselves, not what others expected. They wish they'd stayed in touch with their friends, and they wish they'd had the courage to express their feelings. So like when we leave this world, in my mind, we only leave with 2 things. It's regrets and memories. And I think it's really important now for men, albeit the way that we've kind of been taught to look at men and masculinity, that is like kind of the leaders of their families, although that is changing. And I think that should change in some respects, because if we're kind of coming at life from, only from the masculine constructs have been strong, silent, successful, then almost by default, we're going to set our children up to fail. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think there's never been such a weight of responsibility on modern men. I really do feel as we're pioneers. We spoke about, our parents and maybe grandparents saying that, it's a different time. Well, things are moving so fast nowadays that it's a real need to take responsibility for teaching our children about the things that are really important. So when they're living their lives as adults, they are role models for their children. They're healthy. They've got connected friendships. They've got great relationships with their partners. And I think one of the key things to teach our children is to recognize what it is that they want in their life, because without having a plan or a place that we want to arrive at, we will definitely be persuaded and perhaps challenged to pursue different avenues and different paths, ones that maybe don't lead us to where we want to go.
Yeah, it's such a complex issue, isn't it? I think it's something we could, again, like many things we talked about today, we could have a whole session around in itself. I think I'd like, as we just head to wrapping up, in your book, and it's leading on from what the topic we just discussed, you have a great little piece at the end of every chapter. It's like reflective exercises that we can do. And one question that I was reading last night stood out to me, and I wondered if you'd take a moment to answer it. I might have a stab at it as well to help listeners as we round off. It was the challenge to say, and it does lead on from last, if you can only teach your children one thing to equip them for the complexities of life, what would you teach them and why?
Self-awareness. Without an understanding of who we are, what's important to us, and where we want to be, we will without doubt end up pursuing kind of societal success. We'll be influenced by people with perhaps different values to ourselves. I've started now. My daughter will be 6 in December, and every night when I put her to bed, I ask her, what was the favorite part of your day? What did you enjoy the most? What are you looking forward to tomorrow? I'll ask her those questions, and sometimes she'll really engage, and other times it'll be a little bit dismissive because she's only young. But I think that by creating self-awareness and really inviting our children to be present in their own lives, will create an element. Well, firstly, it'll probably create a positive sense of their own image. The self-esteem will be high. By default, then they'll have probably good mental health, and they'll also have the ability to be assertive in their own lives. I think so many people now are caught up kind of in societal success and not necessarily pursuing their own, that they end up kind of being very passive. They just go through the motions, and they aren't really assertive enough to express what it is that's important to them. So yeah, very succinctly, the one thing that I am very conscious about teaching my children now is to be self-aware, and with the hope that they'll have a strong sense of their own identity, and then that'll mean they can go on to live great lives.
I think it's a great shout and a good catch, and I think to complement that, I think mine would perhaps be, because I've been pondering this since I read it last night. I think mine would hopefully be the ability to respond, that responsibility piece, because challenges are going to come. They are going to have a bad game at football. They are going to fail an exam. How do you respond to that? When things go bad, what do you want your response to be to it? And I think if they can take more control of that, I think it will set them up to ask better questions, be curious, move forward with better answers, and identify more, which probably ties into the self-awareness piece about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think for me, that would be my one thing.
EQ over IQ.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of, obviously there's importance in school, don't get me wrong, but that EQ side of things I think is a bit neglected at times. So Dan, I mean, listen, we're pretty much at the time, and first off, thank you very much for agreeing to jump on. I know you're a busy man with a busy schedule, and really appreciate your time. And once again, we've referenced it before, but the book Rethinking Masculinity, do check it out. It's a cracking read. I'm about a third of the way through it. It's like it's talking to me. It's holding a mirror up, Dan. Where can we find you? Where can we find the book? How can we connect and stay engaged?
Thank you, Rob. So if people want a copy of the book, rather than paying Jeff Bezos, you can go to my website and get the book for free, but only pay the cost of postage, which is currently £3. So if people Google BetterMen or BetterMen Coaching, they'll probably find my website. But to be specific, it's www.better-men.uk. And if you look for the Rethinking Masculinity tab, you can get a copy of my book for only £3. My primary social media channel is LinkedIn. And and whether you're interested in Better Men or Men of Mountains or Rethinking Masculinity, ultimately my mission is to bust through the myth of masculinity, the belief that professional success equals personal happiness, and help good men live better lives. So I'm really grateful for you affording me the opportunity to share my message with your audience, Rob.
No, it's an important one, and keep up the work. It's we need more people like you championing this goal. For leveling up, I guess, and reframing what it means to be a man in 2022 and beyond. So keep it up. Dan Stanley, thank you very much for your time. It's a fascinating chat, and appreciate it, and take care. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Rob. Be well.
Good stuff.